Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting episode of Georgetown Speaks. I'm your host Ibrahim Absar, joined by my fellow co-host Abdullah bin Masood today.
Thank you, Ibrahim.
So today we have the privilege of being joined by Joseph Hernandez, the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Strategic Enrollment Management at Georgetown University in Qatar. Joe has been working at GQ for almost 16 years now. Joe, thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be a part of this podcast. We know that it's peak season at the admissions office right now, so we really appreciate the time you took out of your busy schedule to join us here today.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. I'm glad to be here. Excited for the podcast. Excited to get the word about admissions out to your listeners.
Great. So, Joe, as Ibrahim already mentioned, it's been 16 years that you've joined this institution, and 16 years is quite a lot of time to be associated with one institution. So we just want to know, what were the early years like? Like, if you could walk us a bit through your early life and how you what was the lead up like to moving to Qatar, and how did you take up such a role in admissions?
Yeah, I often start off by joking and saying, my time in Qatar is a total accident. It's not something that I ever planned. I never had planned to be in the Middle East. I graduated. I did an undergrad in philosophy at Seton Hall University in New Jersey. And I started working in New York City for a not-for-profit educational organization, Global Kids, which I really loved. The experience, we were working with students who were from New York City, mostly in urban centers and schools that were underperforming. And getting them excited about international affairs, international relations by relating what they were learning with us to what they were living in New York City. It was a great job, probably the best job I ever had. I always tell people the same thing, but it didn't pay very much.
Yeah.
And so I would often take time off and work for an organization that my wife worked for, the Institute of International Education. So I was a program manager on a couple of programs that they ran for different companies, including the Goldman Sachs Global Leaders Program at the time.
I see.
And IIE was bidding on a project for the government of Qatar and invited us to submit our CVs. And we thought, why not?
Yeah.
Had no idea where Qatar was on the map. I don't know if I had ever known Qatar before. But when those CVs were submitted and the project was ultimately accepted, we decided to come sight unseen. So I spent just over 2 years working for the government of Qatar in their scholarship office, where I was working with Qatari students, sending them around the world to the US, the UK, France, Australia, everywhere.
Yeah.
And after my time there, the contract ended, and I made my way over slowly to Georgetown.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, given that you've been here for quite some time, how have you generally seen the influx of, applications and decisions in decision rates in GUQ evolve over the years? How has the trend been in such a long span of time?
And also before that, so when you joined Georgetown, you joined admissions office directly?
No, I joined actually as an operations manager for the Office of Academic Affairs. And when you think back to 2008, I arrived to Qatar in 2005 when Georgetown arrived to Qatar. And so while I was familiar with the university, I was familiar with a number of the early staff members. I wasn't here and I wasn't in admissions.
Yeah.
But when I came in 2008, we were still very much a startup organization. We had not yet graduated a class. That happened in 2009. And the university was growing at a tremendous rate.
Yeah.
And at the time, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, her role oversaw not just academic affairs and the deans as you would know it today, but the faculty, the library, student development, admissions. And so it was very much still startup. And my role was to come on and support financials,
Yeah.
on strategy, and on development of different offices. So at the time, we developed a number of offices that today sort of we almost take for granted, like the Office of Academic Services, the Office of Educational Enrichment, and others. And then, of course, as the organization grew, some of those functions then began to report to their own associate deans and senior assistant deans and the rest.
That's very interesting. So we can say that you spearheaded some of the departments that we are. They're your baby, essentially.
Even I never say spearheaded. I've always enjoyed a role in which I can support development and growth, and support good leaders.
Yeah.
And even in my current role in admissions as assistant dean, I still think that it is very much a support role to sort of deliver the mission, deliver the vision, the strategy for the campus. I like to participate in the process, but I can't take credit for it all.
I understand. Okay, so Joe, now that the admissions application deadline for Georgetown is over, there are tons of students out there who are anxiously waiting for their admission decisions. And I remember back when I was applying to universities, I was like following up with every campus that I applied to, looking at their dorm life, like how a day in the life of a student looks like over there, basically trying to understand how the admission decisions work. And I remember I saw a video from Amherst being uploaded on YouTube, in which they basically ran you through in what ways their admission office essentially works, and they gave you like a behind the scenes perspective of how an admissions team sits down and discusses the application of every individual applicant, and what basically goes on in the decision room. So in that video, they basically had 5-6 people from the admissions office sitting down on one table voting on every application, and people were like by show of hands showing whether an application is accepted, deferred, waitlisted, or rejected. And it really seemed like an intriguing process. So we're keen to understand how the process in GUQ looks like. Like, is this similar in ways to the ways in which other US universities process applications? Like, walk us through what happens in GUQ's decision room behind the scenes.
Yeah. Before I do that, I want to address a part of the question that we didn't address in the last question that you asked in terms of the growth.
Yeah.
So years ago, in the first class that applied, I think we had 100 applicants. We had 25 students in the new class. That has slowly grown.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, in particular since the pandemic, the rate of growth of applications has grown.
Yeah.
This year, we are just over 29% in terms of application numbers over last year.
Oh.
Last year, I think we were about 40% over the year before. So the growth is fast. It's out. It has affected, and the reason why I wanted to touch on that is it has changed the way we look at applications and how we are able to look at applications. We have a relatively small admissions team, but like our main campus, we we also involve our faculty, our advising deans, representatives of student development, and the admission staff. So, while some universities, and I remember a movie years ago, I'm not sure if you've ever seen a movie, I think it's called Admissions, with Tina Fey, and there is a room where it happens. And I think for us, it's more accurate to say there are rooms where it happens. And so are multiple levels, but ultimately our review process does involve the staff, involves subcommittees, committees that review applications. And those committees are representative of the community, the faculty, and the administrative community. And everybody on the committee sort of looks at things. The intention and the reason why we have so many different people coming from different parts of the university looking at applicants is because everybody comes with their own lens and their own interests, right? I like to think that those of us in admissions are looking and sort of ensuring that we have standards that we keep and that we communicate to our staff and faculty committee members. I often think that faculty are really interested in how teachable a student is, and what is the academic potential of that student. Our deans are often interested in how we get a student through the curriculum. How do we ensure that they not just survive, but that they thrive while they're here at Georgetown? And then outside of the classroom, a lot happens. And I think you guys know probably better than most just how much happens outside of the classroom. And so, what kind of a student will this be? Will this person be outside of the classroom? And student life often has that. I think together, all of us work across. That's sort of a real gross generalization as to perspectives, because we're all really interested in bringing somebody into the university that is really going to just add on every level. Right? Our application deadline was February 1st. Now that applications are in, we are still chasing students, applicants for documents, right? For everything from transcripts to English proficiency examinations to personal statements and the rest. And we try to be human about these things. We try to understand that applicants and counselors as well have a lot going on at this time of the year. And so we try to be a bit flexible in terms of documents. But at a certain point, that has to end. We have to move forward with a review. And applications go through a series of review steps, culminating in an interview for many students, not every student. Yeah. We try to interview as many students as we possibly can. And then a committee review, a read. And once that read is done, we come together. And that is the room where it happens, right? Where we sit and we discuss the applicants, the best and worst parts. And we try to come to a consensus in terms of how we rank applicants, how we rate applicants. At the end of about 5 weeks, everybody comes together. All of the scores come together. And then we have decisions to make. And that's where we, what we call crafting a class. So all of the recommendations of the committees are taken on board. And those recommendations are then tied to our mission, our vision for what we think a class can and should look like. And that's the tough part. That's the tough part, sort of trying to come together to say, what will next year's class look like? We always want the next year's class to be representative, to be diverse, and to be academically strong. And with all due respect to you guys, to be academically stronger than the class before. We always want to see progress in terms of what we're doing. And I think this is always something that we work on. So that's sort of a brief synopsis, even if I went on a little bit long, in terms of what we do and how we do it.
No, that was perfect. And especially the fact that you have not only the admissions team reviewing it, but you have members from the faculty, from the student life staff as well, to look at it from a more holistic kind of view. And as you said, they all look at different things. Student life people would focus on what's going on outside the classroom, and faculty would be focusing on how teachable, as you just mentioned. Yeah. So I think that's a great way to look at an application.
I think it's really important that applicants understand that when they're applying, they're telling a story.
Yeah.
And that story has to ring and has to resonate with the admissions officer as much as it has to resonate with a faculty member or somebody else. So I think, for those of your listeners that are thinking about applying, they have to know that they're telling the story and that every part of their application has to resonate with itself and with the reader.
Makes sense. Now, talking about people who are looking to apply, so I think this will be helpful for those high school students who are looking to apply here. I just wanted to ask out that what advice do you have for these people in terms of the wow factor that you see in their applications, and especially with the evolving nature of college admissions in the post-COVID era, what really sets an applicant out?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's a great question that I think admissions officers all around the world, in particular in the United States, where we often do holistic admissions, we're always trying to answer that question, right? I would say, and I've always said, and I don't know if I'll ever change, that the biggest wow always comes with your grades. Mm-hmm. Not just your grades, but those grades that would indicate preparation for the program for which you're applying. So not just your overall grades, but the courses that would indicate to the committee that you would be able to do the work at Georgetown. Not in a school of medicine, not in a school of engineering, but here at Georgetown. And I often tell students that there are resources out there. The National Association for College Admissions Counseling publishes a State of College Admissions report. And in that report, there's a section on factors in the admissions decision. And so they have the survey out. They normally get 180 or 200 respondents, all admissions officers across universities in the U.S. that are members of the National Association for College Admissions Counseling. And they rank different factors in the admissions decision in terms of considerable importance and very important and not so important and down the line, right? There is no substitute for the rigor of the curriculum that you pursue. So how much have you challenged yourself within the curriculum that has been offered to you? We try not to judge a student based on a curriculum that was not available to them for any number of reasons, right? A student that is at a well-resourced school with IB or A levels or APs, and you have 20 APs available to them, that's great. And they should avail of the most rigorous curriculum that they can do well in. But we're not going to hold that against a student from an under-resourced school that doesn't have the number of APs or the number of IB courses available to them. So we try to look at every student within their context. But there is no replacement for academics. At the end of the day, your primary role as a student at university is to be a student. And everything else follows. And so the other factors, would be English language proficiency, especially in a program like ours where the reading and writing intensity is quite high. And so we want to make sure that students can communicate effectively in the classroom, outside of the classroom, via their assignments and the rest. And the other factors that we're looking at really just help us round out sort of our vision for who this person will be and how the university can help that person achieve their own ambitions, right? I was just speaking about a week ago for a group, and what I said was applicants have to realize that the admissions decision, it's a two-way street, right? There has to be there has to be a match, if you will. And that is a match between the students' interests and ambitions, and then the ambitions and the interests of the university as well. And that's when we get down to, who gets in and why and what the class looks like.
That's actually very insightful. And before I hand it over to Ibrahim, so on the topic of academics, so before the deadline, I had so many juniors of mine back home ask me whether I should apply SAT optional or whether I should submit my SAT scores. So ever since COVID and ever since SAT became optional, people have this dilemma about submitting their SAT scores or not. So what's your take on this? Do SAT scores matter now, even though they're optional?
So just in the news this week, you have a university, a college that just went back to the SAT. There are a couple of universities now that are going to be requiring the SAT. Georgetown actually is a university that wants the SAT. Even through the pandemic, Georgetown was not. We have never been optional. We have been flexible. The nature and the composition of our applicant pool here in Qatar, which includes a lot of students that are right here in Qatar, is such that we understand that testing has not made a comeback in the way that it has made a comeback in the United States and other places when we're here in Qatar. So our policy here on the Qatar campus is to accept the score and to review the score when it's submitted, and it can be helpful. When it's not helpful for a student, we treat it as if a student has not submitted the score. And the reason for that is we know that there are plenty of students out there that have taken the test and not submitted. And so we don't penalize them. Right? So we try to be fair. Again, I know that this process, the admissions process, the application process, is probably one of the most stressful sort of processes that students and families go through. And so we try to be human. We try to understand where students are coming from. But there is flexibility there. For a student that has taken the test, the best thing that they can do is sort of evaluate, submit, and give themselves a chance. There's also sorts of data coming out now regarding universities and the likelihood of admission for those students that have submitted test scores versus those that have not. The volume of submissions of test scores for us here on the Qatar campus, especially those that are here in Qatar, is lower. And that's largely because testing has not made a comeback. And of course, with some testing bodies moving to computer-based testing, that has further diminished the capacity to test. And it's not just, every student is expected to bring their own laptop for some of these tests, but you have to have a place to host.
Yeah.
You have to have a place that will support, the numbers of students that are coming in with their own laptops on a regular basis. And so here we haven't made that comeback just yet.
Okay, so going back to, of the elements that essentially make an application stand out, obviously the personal statement that Georgetown requires is a very crucial window into how we evaluate, a student's application. And basically, make more sense of their overall experience, essentially their life experience, and sort of, get a perspective on that. So you've been involved in the Office of Admissions for a number of years now, and I'm sure you might have come across a fair share of, standout essays and personal statements across your time here. So we just want to, ask what really stood out to you in a number of those, essays that you read. And if you remember any that really stood out to you, please share them with us and, walk us through them.
Yeah. So reading personal statements is always, either you laugh or you cry with an applicant, or you're moved or you're not moved, right? Again, the personal statement is part of the story that the student is telling, right? Trying to think of a couple of memorable personal statements. I always tell students that there is no real secret. The formula to admission is in the values of the university, right? Starting with everything for the greater glory of God, to academic excellence, to community and diversity, to men and women for others, people for others, down the line. That is really the formula for admission, right? And when an applicant can place themselves within the Georgetown tradition and within the Georgetown values, and I don't mean in a way that says, I'm not saying that every applicant has to say, I am a person for others, or I appreciate a community and diversity, or I am committed to interreligious understanding. But when they tell that story, when those stories resonate with the values of the institution, I find it's much easier to imagine a student being at Georgetown. Because inside the classroom and outside of the classroom, they will get a sense as to what it means to be at Georgetown University versus at any other university. There was one young person who wrote an essay years ago, and he did not come to Georgetown. I don't remember him coming to Georgetown. Told the story of being in a summer program, and I think he was on the main campus summer program, and he had stepped out of his room, and there were a number of people talking in a sort of open seating area. And he found them to be saying things that were maybe a bit racist, a bit bigoted. And he listened to them as he was eating his cinnamon roll and deciding whether he would say something. And as he sat there or stood there listening, he decided, I have to say something. And then he engaged. And what I imagined was a very sort of spirited conversation where he tried to sort of combat what he was hearing. And he closed his statement by saying, cinnamon rolls and bigots. I eat both of them for breakfast. Right? And it's, these are kinds of things that are memorable in that sense. Another young man tells a story of being on a plane and having someone who was Muslim praying in his seat and looking across and having a sense of sort of fear come over him because this Muslim person was the other. He didn't quite understand it. And he's looking and he's saying to himself, I don't know anything about this brown man who is across from me. But he felt fear. And a little bit further into his plane ride, he realized that he's also a brown man of South Asian descent, not Muslim, and wondering whether people would be looking at him in the same way.
Yeah.
These are stories that, and then I tell students as well, you want to be careful how memorable you are, right? There was one young woman who wrote her personal statement from the position of like a third party point of view, in which she was a troll under a bridge, and it sort of took you left and right and literally under the bridge, and it was memorable. I do remember it. She did come.
Yeah.
She did come to Georgetown. But I remember sitting in an interview with her and saying, talk to me about this personal statement, because, sometimes you really do want to be careful just how far you push it. Again, you don't know who you're speaking to. I think I have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
I think I can forgive a little bit of, silliness and everything. But you don't know. You don't know who's going to be on the other side of that message that you're sending.
Now, you mentioned diversity is an important thing that you look at, and when we walk across the atrium, we see the various flags of different countries, and we're proud of the diversity that Georgetown has. But so I just want to ask that what kinds of diversity, whether socio-economic, racial, national, are you looking at, and what kind of diversities are you aiming for? And my question essentially is, when you're aiming for a diverse class, people coming from different backgrounds, different nationalities, wouldn't the acceptance rates be different than from region-wise or country-wise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the answer to diversity, socioeconomic, yes. National, yes. Religion, yes. Across the board, there's so many different ways that we can parse out the kinds of students that we want and the kind of class that we will have in the fall. I think it's important to take a step back and talk about why. Why do we want a diverse class? Here we have students from all around the world who are engaged in an international affairs curriculum, right? When our students are talking about taking something from the news, Israel-Palestine, it is not just an academic exercise that they're engaged in.
Yeah.
These things are real to so many of our students. When we talk about Kashmir, at one point we were having a beyond the headlines discussion, and we had students from both sides of the line.
Yeah.
In Kashmir, right? That's important. That's important to the learning process. That's important to the experience of the student. We have students who come from the full spectrum of the socioeconomic sort of existence, if you will, right? We think it's important that across all of these different ways that we describe diversity, that students have that experience, because that's the world that you're going into. You're not going into a world that is monolithic or always going to be homogenous. And so having those experiences as an undergrad, we think is helpful. And it adds to the classroom experience and outside of the classroom experience. In terms of the kinds of diversity that we're looking for, we think that the classes that we recruit, that the classes that we enroll should reflect both Qatari society and the world at large, right? We know that this place will never be the largest suburb of a neighboring country, right? Whether that country is Uzbekistan or Pakistan or the United States, or this place will never be that. And so we're always wanting to say, how many students can we accept from any given country, right? I'll give you a hypothetical, entirely hypothetical. Yeah. When you have 300 students applying from a single country, if we were to keep our, we expect the admit rate this year to be between 15 and 16%. If we accepted 10% of those students, that would be 30 students accepted. we maintain around a 60% yield rate, right? So you do the math.
Yeah.
How many students are coming in? They'd be close to 20%, between 17 and 18% of the student body.
Yeah.
And it leaves no space for anybody else.
Makes sense.
And so we have to make very difficult decisions. And I think this is coming back to what I was saying, that applicants have to understand that admissions decisions are not always just about the student.
Yeah.
That the universities have skin in the game, that we have a mission that we want to deliver, that we have a vision and values that are real. And this is one of those things. And it's not always easy for me as somebody who works within admissions to say, yeah, we're not going to be able to admit everybody from this country. And I imagine that my colleagues in Washington, D.C. and in other parts of the world face the same issues. When you have, at Georgetown, we have students that we want students from every state, right? We want students represented from every state in the union on our main campus in D.C. So I imagine that the admit rates by state will also be different. That's not something that I can say for sure with numbers in front of me, but yeah, this is a reality of this profession.
No, that makes perfect sense. Moving on, so you've identified the entire admissions process, but do you think that there is something that we could do better, or some change you would like to bring in the process, something some improvement you'd want to do, something personal to you that you'd want to implement maybe in the process, some change? Because like there's this, because does the admission process, my question essentially is, give room for any slip through the cracks? And if you could like finish those slips.
Yeah. So I'll tell you something that we did 5 years ago that I would love to see continued forever.
Yeah.
And that is the financial aid program that we make available to our students.
Yeah.
Right. When I graduated from my undergrad, I graduated with a fair amount of debt. I have never liked the idea of students coming from the Qatar campus graduating with huge amounts of debt, especially when the countries they come from, where purchasing power parity and the salaries that they may be earning may have them in debt for a very long time.
Exactly.
Now, the Qatar Foundation has always worked to make options available to students that, starting with zero interest loans and then the paid work or loan forgiveness programs that the foundation has had in the past. 5 years ago, we said, let's work with our partners at the foundation and see whether this would work. And it has worked for us. It's increased the number of students that have applied.
For sure.
It has increased the diversity of the students that have applied. And it has made an education that would not otherwise be available to students accessible.
Yeah.
Right? That's something that I would love, an innovation that I would love to keep forever. Right.
Yeah.
In terms of other things that I would love to see, I'd like to see growth. I like the fact that the application numbers are growing.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful to see the class size also growing. And I think the university, I want to stay in my lane here, but I think the university has real opportunities to grow. And in terms of slipping through the cracks, I think we take in terms of application, we take application integrity really seriously in my office. And so where we can, we do what we can to ensure that everyone who is engaged in the process has really abided by our expectations for integrity.
For sure.
Oh, okay. So speaking of like generally the way admission office practices work around the world, I just want to understand a bit more of how the practices over here as a branch campus of a university that's based in the US, how those practices are essentially shaped. Because there are certain things that we notice over here that might not be that necessarily correlated with the way certain admission decisions work out in the US essentially. One element of that is the quotas that we found over here, shared between Qatari students, local students, and international students. I want to understand, are these quotas like kind of borderline defined kind of segments that the admissions office is looking at, in which we're like, okay, we have to intake 40% Qataris, 30% locals, 30 internationals. Like that's the rule of thumb essentially in that case. And the other thing is about age requirements, and that's just out of like curiosity in general. Like certain amount of times we see students being admitted over here that are like 16 years old by the time they enter college. Is that is that a deliberate kind of a practice in which it's like essentially unique to a Georgetown campus based in Qatar, or is it something that's like typically practiced in admission offices across the world?
Yeah. So in answer to the first part of your question, I would say quotas are not defined because we don't have them. We do not have quotas, right? The composition of the class as you would see it, when you look at the number of, we're here in Qatar, right? So there's no mistaking the fact that we want a community that is representative of Qataris in this country, of local expats in this country. I think if you look at a big picture sort of a view of this, Education City and the universities here are about creating a knowledge economy. And those students who were here in Qatar before coming to Georgetown and who were either born or raised here are the likeliest to be contributing to the ongoing creation of that knowledge economy beyond graduation, right? To stay, to work, to engage. So that's important, but there are no quotas. There's nobody knocking on our door saying you need to have 30 or 40 or whatever percentage of Qatari students. Not that I have seen in black and white. Nobody's ever said you must have, right? There's always talk of 60% or more. We want 60% or more Qatari students, and the reality is that the numbers don't sustain. So as a university admissions office, we're bringing in the applications and we will review. And the one promise I think that we make is that when a student is admissible, in particular a Qatari student is admissible, we will admit them. And so we do the best we can to recruit here within our community. But in terms of quotas on any particular group in that way that they're often described, it's simply not the case. When you look at the number of applications of Qatari students, now the international students, their application numbers are growing. But as we described earlier, when they grow in large balloons from certain parts of the world, it's hard for us to really, if they grew evenly around the world, for every country around the world, we had, I think we would see a different composition of a class. And then the second half of your question, can you repeat the second half?
It was about the age.
So age as well. I think we've had students as young as 16. We've had students, I think I want to say that the oldest student that we have admitted, or that has been admitted during my time, was perhaps just maybe pushing 30 or just over 30 or something like that. We don't have age limit restrictions.
But wouldn't that cause some kind of discrepancy, having a 16-year-old in one class and let's not go to 30s, but like a 25-year-old or 22 even, 16 and 22 in one class, in one setting? Wouldn't that like cause some kind of discrepancy?
Like just in terms of like college readiness at the end of the day, or the maturity to be able to, handle a college experience?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that you guys are the hosts, but you guys are also students in these classes where you have students who of different, I could ask you, I think you'd be the experts in that space. I can tell you that from a university policy perspective, we do not have an age restriction in that sense. But what we do have in place are restrictions on who can be considered eligible for an undergraduate degree, right? So students that have spent 2 or more years, or more than 2 years at a university, are not eligible to apply.
Makes sense.
Students who have already earned an undergraduate degree at another institution, even if they wanted to start from scratch, are not eligible to apply. So I think in terms of college readiness, I think there are differences between a 25-year-old student and an 18-year-old student. But we've had this type of mix. Part of it is because we have students coming from all over the world, different educational systems, different curricula. In some countries, they're graduating at 17 years old and they get here just before they turn 18. And in other countries, they might be 19 or 20 and they've taken a gap year or two. And the reasons for these gap years, the reasons for these delays are often not in the control of the student. They perhaps had to work or they had to.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine, the alternative and to say, let's deny an education to someone who's a bit older because, life intervened.
Moving on, Joe. So I remember back in middle school, my teacher once told me that you need to pay attention to mathematics because it's considered the mother of all subjects. And no matter which program you apply to, math will come in handy. So my question stems from there that do you think applying to a program such as an SFS program here at Georgetown, Qatar, where you're internationally, let's say, looking to study international history, does math play a part in it? Or do you need to be hands-on with mathematics? Do you look at mathematics scores and test scores? Because around campus, between students and professors, and I've had this talk with professors and students, there is this kind of perception held that GUQ students are not that math savvy. Maybe because we don't need that much math because of the way our course is structured. We're more into writing papers and analyzing papers. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, so what we do in admissions is we are trying to predict how a student would do in our program. And having a good background in mathematics helps us more confidently predict how you will do in the program. In particular, when it gets to the required economics courses that every student at Georgetown has to take, whether they are an international history major, culture and politics major, international politics major, or an international economics major. Everybody has to take those 3 required economics courses. And so our ability to predict how a student might do is influenced by their preparation in mathematics. We know it's very clear that not every student is going to excel at mathematics. Not every student is going to take pure math, at the upper secondary level. But we want to make sure that a student is going to have the right preparation to make it through the curriculum, and that's what we're trying to do in admissions. Whether more students like or dislike mathematics, are good at or not good at mathematics once they get here, I think students always talk, and at a certain point, I think prior to my coming on to Georgetown, there were all sorts of things, all sorts of stories as to what SFS stood for. And one of those things was, safe from science, right? We have a science requirement in our curriculum, right? We have the econ requirement. So there's no getting away. And part of that is, I think, what our curriculum intends to do. And that is, we intend to prepare students to work in a world in which understanding economics and mathematics and science and all of these things are part and parcel. It's no longer that you can just be, a specialist in one space and function in a world like we live in today.
Makes perfect sense.
Joe, thank you so much for your time to join us here today for an exclusive, first of its kind, admissions behind the scenes episode. I'm sure that the insights that you shared here today will prove to be extremely useful for both the current and future, Georgetown applicants. And by the way, can we get a heads up of when the decisions are rolling out? Because a lot of students are eagerly waiting.
April 1st. By April 1st, we should have decisions.
Okay, so that's an exclusive GUQ Speaks
April 1st.
Announcement.
By April 1st.
Mark your calendars.
Mark your calendars, guys. This is an exclusive announcement on our platform. And for all of those who are eagerly waiting to hear back on your admissions decisions, the GUQ Speaks team is rooting for you big time. We can't wait to welcome you all here very soon. Thank you so much for tuning in, and best of luck with your applications.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GUQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GQ_speaks and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.